You are 14 years old. Your father has just told you who you will marry. You have never met this man. You will not be asked if you want him. You will not be asked anything at all. Because in medieval Europe, your answer does not matter. Or does it? What if you said no? What actually happened to a woman who refused to marry in the Middle Ages? The answer is darker than you think, and more surprising than you expect. Because some women did refuse, and what happened next reveals something about the medieval world that most people never learn. Let's start with why marriage was not optional. In medieval Europe, marriage was not about love. It was about survival. For peasant families, a daughter's marriage meant one less mouth to feed and an alliance with another household. For noble families, marriage meant land, titles, and political power. For everyone, marriage meant children. And children meant someone to work the fields, inherit the property, and take care of you when you were old. The church agreed. By the 12th century, theologians had declared marriage a sacrament, which is a sacred ritual believed to be directly ordained by God. Gratian's Decretum, a massive collection of church law compiled in 1140, laid out the rules. Marriage was one of 7 sacred rites. It was a duty, not a choice, and refusing it, that was suspicious. A woman who did not marry raised questions. Was she sick? Was she barren? Was she secretly sinful? Was she under demonic influence? Barbara Hanawalt, the medieval historian at Ohio State University, spent decades studying English court rolls and coroners' reports. Her work, especially The Ties That Bound, revealed how tightly knit village life was. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone watched everyone. A woman who did not marry was not just unusual, she was a problem. Here is what that problem looked like in practice. If you were a peasant woman and you refused to marry, your father could compel you. He controlled the household. He controlled the property. He controlled, essentially, your future. Manor court records from 13th century England show disputes over marriage rights. Lords had opinions about who their tenants married. Marriage was not just a family decision. It was an economic arrangement that involved the entire village. If your father died and you had no brother, your lord might decide your marriage for you. This was called merchant, a fee paid to the lord when a woman under his control married. The lord had a financial interest in your wedding day, and if you refused to marry at all, you were costing him money. Eileen Power, the pioneering historian of medieval women, wrote extensively about this in her book Medieval Women, published posthumously in 1975. She documented how women's lives were shaped by 3 forces: family, church, and law. All 3 pushed relentlessly toward marriage. None of them cared what you wanted. But here is where it gets interesting. Some women found a way out. The convent. If you refused to marry, you could enter a religious house. This was not necessarily a punishment. For some women, the convent was a liberation. Behind those walls, you could read. You could write. You could manage a community. You could escape the cycle of pregnancy and childbirth that killed so many medieval women. Hildegard of Bingen entered a convent at a young age and became one of the most powerful voices in 12th century Europe. She wrote theology, composed music, corresponded with popes, and led her own monastery. She never married. She never had children, and she was celebrated, not punished. But Hildegard was exceptional. Most women who entered convents did so because their families placed them there, and not all convents were equal. Wealthy women brought dowries. Poor women did the manual labor. The convent was an escape, but it was also a cage of its own kind. You traded one master for another. You traded the authority of a husband for the authority of an abbess. Ruth Mazo Karras, a historian at the University of Minnesota, has written extensively about medieval sexuality and social control. Her work shows that the church did not simply demand marriage. It demanded sexual regulation. Women who lived outside of marriage, whether in convents or alone, were under constant scrutiny. Their bodies were considered sites of danger. Their independence was considered a threat. And then there were the women who chose neither marriage nor the convent. The Beguines. Starting in the late 12th century in the Low Countries, which is roughly modern-day Belgium and the Netherlands, groups of women began living together in small communities. They were not nuns. They did not take permanent vows. They worked, usually in the textile trade, and they prayed. They supported themselves. They answered to no husband and no abbess. For a while they thrived. The Beguine movement spread across Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and France. At its height, there were hundreds of Beguine communities. These women were radical, not because they were loud or violent, but because they were quiet, because they were independent, because they proved that women could live without male authority and still be respectable. The Church noticed. In 1311, the Council of Vienne declared the Beguine movement heretical. Heretical meaning it went against official church teaching. The Pope ordered the suppression of Beguine communities across Europe. The official reason was theological. The real reason was control. Women living independently, managing their own money, making their own decisions, without a husband, without a father, without an abbess, were dangerous, not to society, to the system. Many Beguine communities survived by going underground or by rebranding as quasi-religious houses. But the message was clear. A woman who refused to marry, who refused to enter a convent, who refused to submit to any male authority, was a heretic. Now think about what that means. In medieval Europe, you had three options as a woman. Marriage, convent, or accusation. You could be a wife, a nun, or a suspect. Those were your choices. But what if none of those options were available? What if you were too poor to bring a dowry to a convent? What if no man wanted to marry you? What if you were a widow with no family? Court records from medieval England and France reveal the answer. Women who lived alone were subject to suspicion, harassment, and legal vulnerability. They could not own property in most places without a male guardian. They could not testify in court in many jurisdictions. They were economically dependent on the goodwill of their neighbors and their lord. Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women in medieval history, was married twice and bore 10 children. Even she, a queen, was essentially imprisoned by her first husband, King Louis VII of France, and later by her second husband, Henry II of England. Eleanor spent 16 years locked in a tower for supporting her son's rebellion against Henry. If a queen could not escape marriage without consequences, what chance did a peasant woman have? Christine de Pizan wrote The Book of the City of Ladies in 1405. She was responding to centuries of male writers who claimed women were naturally inferior, naturally sinful, naturally suited to subjugation. Christine built an imaginary city, brick by brick, using the stories of great women throughout history. She was arguing, essentially, that women deserved a place in the world that was not defined by who they married. But Christine was a widow. She only had the freedom to write because her husband died. Here is the twist you did not expect. The medieval church, which demanded marriage as a sacrament, also created the very loopholes that allowed some women to avoid it. The convent system, flawed as it was, gave women like Hildegard access to education, leadership, and autonomy that married women could never dream of. The church's own celibacy doctrine meant that priesthood was closed to women, but religious life was not. The same institution that trapped women also, accidentally, freed some of them. And the women who were most free, often the ones at the very bottom or the very top, noble widows with money and connections, peasant women who were too poor for anyone to bother with. The women in the middle, the ones with enough to be watched but not enough to be protected, those were the ones who suffered most. The real punishment for refusing to marry was not a dungeon. It was not a burning. It was invisibility. It was poverty. It was the slow, grinding weight of a society that simply could not imagine a woman without a man beside her. And that weight did not disappear in 1500. It did not disappear in 1800. It did not disappear in 1900. Ask your grandmother what people said when she was young and unmarried. Ask your mother what assumptions people made about her life choices. Ask yourself how many times you have been asked, "But are you married?" As if the answer defines whether your life counts. The medieval world demanded that women marry. It punished those who refused. It called them heretics, witches, and spinsters. It erased them from the records. But some women said no anyway. And that refusal, quiet, stubborn, and dangerous, is one of the most radical acts in the entire history of human civilization. You are 14 years old. Your father has just told you who you will marry. You have never met this man. And somewhere inside you, in a place you do not yet have words for, you are already deciding your answer.